Good evening. East Herts District Council, Development Management Committee, 10th of January 2024. Welcome committee members and officers. Welcome everybody that's visiting, and welcome to those that are watching the committee via YouTube this evening. Could we start with apologies and substitutions, please?
Yeah, Chairman, just one apology from Councillor Aubrey Holt and Councillor Stanbull is his substitute for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to say welcome to everybody that's come to attend this committee meeting. This is the Development Management Committee. It's a very formal committee. I wanted to introduce the people that are on this top table. I'm Yvonne Estop. I'm the chair of Development Management Committee. Councillor Stephen Watson is the vice chair. We have the professional planning advisors that work for East Herts Council. Neil Button, Nick Reed, and Diane Verona. And then the head of planning, Sarah Saunders, our legal advisor, Victoria Wilders, and our democratic services advisor, Peter Manning. Are there any declarations of interest? Excuse me. And so we continue on the left, Kay Mead, who is one of our officers, Karen Fawcett and Rani Gartura, officers of East Herts Council. They are planning and legal advisors. Members, are there any declarations of interest? Item 4 is the minutes of the last meeting on the 6th of December. Do any of you have any comments or amendments to make on those minutes? Would somebody like to propose? Councillor Buckmaster and somebody to second, Councillor Devonshire. Thank you. So can I see those in favour of accepting the minutes as an accurate record? Those against? And anybody abstaining? Thank you very much. We now move on to the planning applications before us this evening. The first application is application number 3222067 FUL. This is a retrospective application to change a temporary bridge for vehicle access to a permanent access bridge at the Grange Paddocks Leisure Centre in Bishop Stortford. Could I ask Nick Reed to introduce this application?
Thank you, Chair. The application before members tonight is made by East Herts District Council and seeks planning permission for the permanent retention of a temporary road and pedestrian bridge which provides access to Grange Paddocks Leisure Centre. Can I have the first slide, please? The application site is located within Bishop Stortford and comprises an access road, parking areas, 2 bridges that are used in association with Grange Paddocks Leisure Centre. Second slide. The site is bisected by the River Stort and is within flood zones 2 and 3. The site is also within the Greenbelt and an area of archaeological significance. Next slide, please. 2 bridges cross the river and provide 2-way vehicular access and segregated pedestrian access to Grange Paddocks Leisure Centre. The southernmost river crossing, which is the subject of this application, was constructed as a temporary crossing for use by construction vehicles associated with the redevelopment of the leisure centre. The siting and design of the bridge were approved for the discharge of the construction management condition imposed following granting of permission to redevelop the leisure centre. The temporary bridge was retained for subsequently for the artificial sports pitch. The temporary crossing replaces a timber pedestrian bridge that has been in situ, that was in situ since 2011. Next slide. The main considerations for members this evening are the principle of development in the Greenbelt, the impacts on landscape, visual and neighbour amenity, highways and parking implications, the impact on biodiversity, flood risk and archaeology. The site is located within the Greenbelt, whereby applications will be considered in line with the provisions of policy GBR1 of the district plan and the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF. The NPPF states that the construction of new buildings is an appropriate development in the Greenbelt, except in certain circumstances. The NPPF goes on to advise that engineering operations are not inappropriate in the Greenbelt, provided they preserve its openness. There is both a spatial and visual component to the assessment of openness in the Greenbelt. When constructed, the bridge replaced the timber pedestrian bridge that had been in the same location since 2011. The temporary roads bridge is greater width than the previous bridge and thus occupies a greater volume and would result in a minimal reduction to the openness of the Greenbelt in spatial terms. In terms of the visual impact on the Greenbelt, the road and footway surfaces are not raised significantly above the adjacent land on either side of the river. The only vertical intrusion is in the form of barriers located on either side of the structure. The amount of visual intrusion is not dissimilar to that which existed when the previous pedestrian bridge was in situ. Furthermore, the bridge is set within an area of established car parking, hard surfacing, general street furniture. Given the context of the site and its surrounds, it is considered that the retention of the bridge would have a neutral impact on the openness of the Greenbelt in visual terms. On balance, it is considered that the retention of the bridge on a permanent basis would not materially reduce the openness of the Greenbelt. Accordingly, the development would accord with policy GBR1 and NPPF. The bridge is comprised of a single track carriageway and a segregated pedestrian footway with barriers extending along the edge of the structure. The bridge is constructed in galvanized steel with an asphalt road surface. The bridge is located to the south of an existing single track vehicular bridge. The bridge has a simple and functional design and is similar in appearance to the Northern Road Bridge. Given the context of the site and the existing accessways, parking areas on either side of the river, the bridge does not appear out of keeping within the landscape and is considered to relate satisfactorily to the site and the wider locality. The proposal therefore complies with policy DS4 of the district plan. In terms of the impact on neighbour amenity, a separation gap of approximately 20 metres is retained between the bridge and the closest residential property. The separation distances involved and the scale of the development mean that it's unlikely that the bridge would result in a reduction in the amenity being experienced by the adjoining occupiers. Concerns have been raised relating to noise resulting from cyclists and child scooters crossing the metal surface of the pedestrian footbridge. It's noted that the majority of pedestrian and cycle traffic using the footbridge are during the opening hours of the leisure centre, which vary between 6 AM and 10 PM on weekdays and 7:30 AM and 6 PM at weekends. It is also noted that vehicles also use the bridge during these hours. The types of noise which is of concern is likely to be infrequent, and in the context of the site, the adjacent car parks and access road from Rye Street, it is considered that neighbour amenity would not be detrimentally impacted. The permanent retention of the temporary bridge would allow two-way traffic to access Grange Paddocks Leisure Centre and would improve the flow of traffic into and out of the site during peak times. The segregated pedestrian footway would allow customers accessing the leisure centre and sports pitches to cross the river without risk of coming into conflict with other road users or cyclists. The Highway Authority has been consulted and does not wish to restrict the grant of planning permission. With regards to the parking, 4 parking spaces were lost in order to construct the bridge. It's noted that a green travel plan was adopted as part of the approval for the leisure centre redevelopment. Secure bicycle storage is available, and the site is in a sustainable location with access by foot or cycle from the town centre. That will help to encourage car-free journeys and reduce dependence on private car use. It is also noted that additional car parking can be provided at Northgate End Car Park. Were the bridge to be removed, pedestrians would be required to share the remaining road bridge with vehicles, and on this basis it is considered that the factors discussed would offset the minor loss of parking spaces. The district plan Policies require developments to result in a net increase in biodiversity and ecological value of the site. No additional loss of riverbank habitat, trees or hedging would occur as a result of the development. A section of hedging was removed in order to construct the bridge, and it was understood that this was to be replaced once the bridge was removed. Given the application seeks to permanently retain this bridge, it's recommended that a replacement section of hedging or compensatory planting is provided. This shall be secured by way of landscaping condition. The site falls predominantly within flood zones 2 and 3. A floods risk assessment was submitted in support of the application. New development of this type within flood zones 2 and 3 will be required to pass the sequential test. The purpose of the sequential test is to steer development to areas at the lowest risk of flooding. Only where there are no reasonably available sites in low and medium risk areas will development within high risk areas be allowed. Access to Grange Paddocks Leisure Centre is constrained by the River Stort to the west and the railway line to the east. As such, vehicular access to the leisure centre must cross the river. The existing location of the bridge is therefore the only reasonable and available location for a river crossing, and for this reason it is considered that the sequential test is passed. The provision of a new bridge is a water-compatible use as defined by the NPPF. It is noted that the exceptions test is not required to be passed where development is located in flood zone 3B and is classed as water-compatible. However, water-compatible uses should be designed and constructed to remain operational and safe during times of flood and result in no net loss of floodplain storage and should not impede water flows or increase flood risk elsewhere. The Environment Agency has been consulted and has provided an assessment of the bridge and its impact on flood risk. The bridge has a relatively low soffit level. However, this is not dissimilar to the existing northern bridge crossing. The EA have advised that the proposed bridge will not increase flood risk in the area. The Environment Agency have advised that due to the modelled flow routes show that water spilling out of the bank further upstream of the bridge during flood events. As such, it is likely that debris could be carried onto the it is likely that debris is likely to be carried onto the floodplain to the east of the bridge. Debris could potentially be lodged in these bridges. Consequently, the EA has recommended a condition requiring bridge inspection and maintenance plan to be submitted. A management plan has now been submitted and sets out a schedule of regular checks that will be carried out by the council. The maintenance plan is considered to be acceptable and it should be secured by condition in the event that permission is granted. During times of flooding, refuge and egress is possible by utilising the railway bridge and footpaths to the east of the leisure centre, which are in the area of lowest risk of flooding. The development is considered to comply with policies WAT1, GIP 6 of the Neighbourhood Plan and Section 14 of the NPPF. Regarding the heritage implications of the application, the site is located within an area of archaeological significance. However, the Historic Environment Department at Hertfordshire County Council have been consulted and have not raised any objections. In summary, the site is within the green belt, but would not constitute inappropriate development. There is some additional visual impact to the character of this part of the site, but it's considered that this location within an established car park is appropriate and that the adverse impact is limited. The development is appropriate to the flood zone in which it is located and would not exacerbate the risk of flooding. It is considered that the development would not result in harm to the neighbouring amenity and there would be no adverse impact on any designated archaeological assets. Conditions are recommended in relation to the provision of landscaping and the operation of the bridge in accordance with the submitted maintenance and inspection plan. Accordingly, it is considered that the proposal accords with the relevant policies of the NPPF, district and neighbourhood plans, and that the planning balance falls in favour of the redevelopment. It is therefore recommended that the planning consent be granted subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Committee members, your comments and questions. Councillor Stowe.
Thank you. Having acknowledged the concern about the noise on the footbridge, I just wonder if there's something we can mitigate that to try and deal with that concern.
The only thing that I could potentially think of would be the resurfacing of the footway or its replacement. Yep, apologies for that. Yep, essentially, the only way to potentially mitigate that impact would be to replace the surface of the footway. Having visited the site, given the context in relation to Rye Street, a busy sort of road into the town centre, the context of the site, which is it's an existing parking area, vehicles manoeuvring, accessing the leisure centre itself, doors closing, for example, it's not considered that the additional impact of cyclists or children's scooters crossing the footway would have an adverse impact. Another option would be signage requiring people to, or requesting that people dismount bicycles. I believe there is actually some signage down there at the moment. Whether or not that's ignored or not, I don't know, but that would be another option.
If I could just come back, I went down there on a weekend, and there is a noise apparent, and it's a different sort of noise to closing doors and cars driving on gravel. And I think if it could be done, a better surface on that bridge would be a good idea.
Councillor Copley.
Yeah, I'd like to say this actually is in my ward, although I'm speaking tonight, obviously a member of DMC, so I've actually been able to speak to many people, and I actually go there on a weekly basis, if not more, because I go along to swimming lessons. So, I mean, I've also, just following on from Councillor Stowe's point, in terms of that road surface, particularly on that pedestrian bridge, it is very noisy, and I've also had people raise concerns about that surface in terms of like walking dogs. It's not apparently very good for dogs' feet. So, I mean, my suggestion would be, can we put some kind of rubber matting down on it, so that wouldn't be incredibly expensive or costly, but it would help from a noise perspective and also from a, you know, saving dogs' feet perspective. I do appreciate that there are actually signage down there in terms of not cycling, but they are totally ignored. I mean, I've seen that on a frequent basis, so I'm afraid I don't think more signage would be the solution, but I do think something like rubber matting would help.
That would be a possibility. Some sort of noise absorbent surface possibly. The only thing I would mention is the existing surface does obviously allow drainage. So there's probably
those rubber mats with holes in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. There'd probably be need to accommodate some
Sorry,
kind of compromise
I probably
there.
thought that was in way too much detail. Second point I've just had raised with me, and also I've noticed for myself, the signage on there and also the road markings are not right. So they're trying to basically, you can't see it from this photo, but on the other side of the bridge, they're effectively trying to send pedestrians over the roadway. I'm presuming that was because the previous bridge was obviously located slightly differently. It is very confusing for motorists if you don't go there frequently, and I was wondering if that would also be updated.
Yeah, but the site is actually within private land, so it wouldn't be a matter for the Highways Authority. So it would be, but it would be within the gift of the council to look into kind of updating the road markings. I did notice that there were some
they're
construction traffic only, for example.
Yeah, and then on the other side, it's trying to tell people to go just on that side if you're driving, and that pedestrians should come this side. And obviously for people who go there frequently, we all know how it works, but you can see some people pausing because they're not quite sure what they're meant to be doing. But I would say on a positive note, nobody has suggested to me that the bridge shouldn't be retained. It's just those minor comments in terms of those two things.
Okay.
But thank you.
Councillor Watson.
I mean, looking at 8.15 about the segregated pedestrian footway would allow customers access to the leisure centre and sports pitches to cross the river without risk of coming into contact with road users or cyclists. So, I mean, presumably cyclists are free to and supposed to use the road crossing that river. And it doesn't look particularly cyclist friendly. Would you?
As I say, I guess technically cyclists should be using or potentially using the road crossings rather than the footbridge. I do note that there is signage, existing signage that does require or does ask cyclists to dismount before crossing the bridge.
So if they dismount, they're pedestrians basically. So there aren't any cyclists that are being segregated from the.
No, yeah. I'll take.
Councillor Devonshire.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo what Councillor Copley said. I know this is not a planning consideration, I understand that. But on this side, you've got 2 arrows going in. On the other side of the bridge, you've still got 2 arrows going in. So new members come to the exit and can't get out of the car park. They don't know where to go.
Yeah.
So can I just impress on somebody, they need to look at the arrows marked on the road, please. Thank you.
Can I, in relation to landscape, the gap between this bridge and the adjoining bridge, perhaps you could tell us what's in that gap, and then it seems as if it has the potential to be a bit unsightly. So the question is whether this might be included in the landscape condition.
Yes, potentially, but there's essentially it is the river is between the 2 bridges. There's a small area of riverbank that's been retained. It is relatively limited. However, it could be used for planting, replacement hedging, for example.
Could I suggest that first of all we have a look at condition number 2, which is the landscape condition, and that is modified, and so that it talks about hard and soft landscaping, so that it can include the surface of the bridge, the footbridge part, and then in the reason to include, to ensure a satisfactory surface to the footbridge, you know, and to avoid noise, something to that effect. And then perhaps say where, indicate where there might be an opportunity for new planting, if there is an opportunity by that riverbank part. And then secondly, whether we could have an informative that says that the applicant should review all of the road markings and all of the signage to make sure that it is correct and sightly. If that fits in with the nature of the.
I think that's entirely possible.
So, members, do you have any other comments, or are you ready to move to a decision? And if so, does anybody want to propose that? Councillor Buckmaster?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to propose this motion. Sorry, not motion, planning application.
Does that include the condition amendment and the informative? Yes.
Thank you. Yes, I need to say that, don't I?
Make sure. That's including the condition and the informative. Right at the end.
Right at the end. So members, the recommendation is that planning permission be granted, subject to the conditions set out, and subject to an amendment to condition number 2 on hard and soft landscaping, and the inclusion of an informative about road markings and signs.
Seconded, please.
So we have a proposer. Is there somebody who can second? Councillor Stowe? Thank you very much. And those in favour of that recommendation?
Everyone, thank you.
That's everybody. So that's carried. Permission's granted for that. Thank you. Now application 3/21/2509 FUL. And this is an application for the change of use of land at Cherry Green Lane, Westmill, for 2 Gypsy and Traveller pitches. And this proposes in total 2 mobile homes, 4 touring caravans, 2 day room amenity buildings, along with an access road, hard standing, drainage, and a widened entrance. So could I ask Members, this afternoon at 2, Democratic Services received an email from Councillor Jeff Jones, who is the Herts County Council councillor for Buntingford Division, in relation to addressing the committee on this application. As per the council constitution, paragraph 6.4.2 sets out that all speaking requests must be made by 5 p.m. 2 working days prior to the meeting. I raise this now under the constitution, as the committee can depart from this if it sees fit on certain applications, in accordance with paragraph 6.4.5 of the Constitution. But we have to vote on this. And so I propose that this committee allows Councillor Jones to speak on the basis of paragraph 6.4.5 of the Constitution. Would anybody second that?
Hold on, 3 minutes.
This is for a 3-minute period. So Councillor Hill, second. So members, can I see all those in favour of allowing Councillor Jones to speak?
It's fine. It's 10, 11.
And that's fine. So that's carried. So Councillor Jones will speak when the time comes. Now can I ask Diane Verona, please, to present the case?
Thank you, Chair. First slide. Yes, it's already up. Sorry, I've had to move over, so I've lost my mouse. Right, this first slide shows the area of land as the application site, as it's pointed to it in the arrow, and it's south of Cherry Green Lane. Next slide, please. It's just a bit closer to show the site, although this is taken from Google Maps, so it's not an up-to-date one of an aerial view. We move on to the next slide, please, the location plan, and this shows the red line boundary. And it's a parcel of land located to the south of Cherry Green Lane and lies within an area designated as rural area beyond the Greenbelt, and also in an area of archaeological significance. The village of Westmill, which you can't see on this location plan, which is designated as a Group 2 village in the local plan, lies to the east of the site, approximately 130 metres to the east. Because the site is in with the rural area of the Greenbelt, policy GBR2 is applicable. And this seeks to maintain the rural area beyond the Greenbelt as a valued countryside resource. But it also allows certain types of developments. And Part G of policy GBR2 allows for the accommodation for gypsies and travellers and travelling show people in accordance with policy HOU 9, gypsy and travellers and travelling show people, or non-nomadic gypsies and travellers and travelling show people in accordance with policy HOU 10. The application, as stated, is for the change of use of the land to gypsy and traveller residential pitches, accommodating the siting of 2 mobile homes, 4 touring caravans and 2 day room amenity buildings. It says it's part retrospective because there are actually 2 mobile homes in situ on the site. And also there's been some drainage put in and a septic tank. But the remainder of the description is part of this application for your decision this evening. Now, we've mentioned the preamble to GBR2 sets out the context of the policy. However, regard should also be had to planning policy for travellers' sites, which should be read in conjunction with the NPPF. The PPTS provides a definition of gypsies and travellers at Annex 1, which was revised in December 2023. And this was added, a persons of nomadic habit of life, whatever their race or origin, including such persons who on grounds only of their own or their families or dependents, educational health needs or old age, have ceased to travel temporarily or permanently. And this is the addition, or permanently, but excluding members of an organised group of travelling show people or circus people. The applicants have provided verification that the occupiers meet the definition of gypsies and travellers as set out in the planning policy for travellers sites, often abbreviated to PPTS. Excuse me, sorry, my voice is giving out. Now we go to summary of, sorry, I beg your pardon. The consultee responses. The Highway Authority has recommended permission and should not be restricted subject to conditions and informatives. They originally objected to the application, especially in regard to the access. If you could have the next slide, please. And this is a revised site plan where they've moved the access further. It's still in the northwestern corner, but further towards the centre of the site. And this has enabled them to produce the visibility displays that the highways require in order for safe ingress to and egress from the site. And this, the highways officer is now quite happy with that. The Historic Environment Unit were consulted also because it's in an area of archaeological significance as identified in the local plan. However, since December, they have submitted a written scheme of investigation, and this has been accepted by the Historic Environment Unit. And it's like a part, the first part of the archaeological assessment. And this then will be continued with a condition, should planning permission be forthcoming, for them to abide by this written scheme of investigation and investigate further before, this will be a pre-commencement condition before any construction on the site. The landscaping advisors recommend that additional information submitted is acceptable. And we've got additional hedging to the front boundary and landscaping where they've moved the access. They've had to remove some of the hedging, but they're going to replant that the bit on the northwest side of the access. And landscaping around the site would also be acceptable. The additional hedging to the front will help with the screening of the development, planting around the perimeter, and would further screen the development from the public view, because the main view of the site would be from Cherry Green Lane. The ecology unit were consulted, however, they have yet to comment. In that time, though, the applicants have submitted a biodiversity net gain metric, and this has been assessed by the case officer and is found to be acceptable in that they will actually have a biodiversity net gain of 10% on the site. And this is tied up with the landscaping as well, and is also conditioned. Environmental Services raised concerns about the waste, but the applicant submitted details of the septic tank, and the Environmental Service are now quite happy with the drainage on the site so far. Right, could we go to the next slide, please? So these are the day rooms. Now, this is the floor plan and the elevations of the day rooms. And these are attached to each of the two sites. And they provide day room, and they provide shower facilities and toilet. And they are connected to, they will be connected to the water supply and heating as well in the proposal. Could we just go back to the red line boundary, please? The red line location plan is shown in site in relation to adjacent dwellings and buildings. The neighbouring residential property, known as the Lighthouse, lies to the west of the site, and there are a number of agricultural buildings that lie to the south of the site. There have been a number of applications granted for the agricultural buildings to the south, but these have all been submitted under prior approval. And it was it's for the change of agricultural building to Class C3, which is residential. If we go back to the day room, then we're going to move on to the actual photos, the site photos. So these are, if we go to 8, yeah, photos looking towards the static homes from Cherry Green Lane. And it's, next slide, please. This shows the 2 static mobile homes to the right and to the left. And then you've got the touring caravans that are there. If we go to slide 10, we're showing to the west of the site here, where the lighthouse, the nearest residential property is, and the boundary along that side. Next slide, please. This is showing the boundary to the left, which is an open field, and the fencing along there at present. These photographs were taken on the 22nd of December, so they're pretty recent. Move to slide 12, please. Here we have the wider view of the site, which shows how it's set back, and the gravel path and road which will lead up to the buildings to the south of the site. And I think at present that's me finished. Just open for questions.
Thank you, Diane. Before we move on, I just wanted to basically confirm or to check that what this application is doing is it's approaching an existing unauthorized use. And so the existing use would stay 2 pitches, but the physical arrangement would not stay. The proposals show a different physical arrangement. Apart from the fact that the 2 mobile homes, or this contradictory statement, mobile static homes, they would stay, but their position would change a little bit. So that is what is in front of us at the moment. So now I want to call on Mr. Andrew Andrew, please, to come and speak. Welcome. Just whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'm probably the most affected, living next door to this situation. And I have to say, over the last 2 and a bit years, I've got to know Shane and his family. Have actually surprisingly turned out to be really nice people. Obviously got a daughter with special needs, young children, so I understand they need somewhere to live. But this process has gone on for way too long. And I was hoping today we'd get an answer, one way or another. So we're not left in limbo, because at the moment we're left in limbo because they can't repair the site to make it better on the eye. And they, obviously, I live next door to it. So, you know, I'm just hoping to get an answer today. That's it.
Can I just ask, you live in the house nearest to the fence? And it's a bungalow?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Andrew. That's very helpful. Can I ask now for Councillor Anne Downs to come to speak? And you represent Westmill Parish Council? Yes.
GBR2 requires that the proposed development is compatible with the character of the rural area. And whilst the officer's report refers to the landscape character assessment of 2007, it fails to take into account the special, distinctive and valuable historic characteristics of Westmill and its surroundings are claimed in this assessment and in Westmill's Conservation Area Plan 2017. These documents highlight the value of this rare village in a valley bottom with its medieval layout clustered around the church that is still apparent and largely uncompromised. It is also acknowledged that an important characteristic of the medieval village is the layout is a separation of the built village boundaries from nearby farms and hamlets. The site forms a significant part of such a separation. Given this and the fact that the NPPF states that considerable weight should be given to conserving heritage assets, this development is not compatible with the rural area. The Equalities Act 2010 requires both the advancement of equality of opportunity and the fostering of good relations between persons who share a relevant protective characteristic and persons who do not share it. This is reflected in policies HOU 9 and 10E, which require integration and successful coexistence between the site and the settled community. The Planning Department is aware of significant events adversely impacting the neighbours, but it is indisputable fact that all 3 direct neighbours to the site have left or are in the process of leaving their homes or land. Both Woodside and the site behind the application have been put up for sale. The grazing field has been vacated and 2 houses adjacent to this field are being sold. Given the adverse impact on neighbours and the wider settlement of Westmill and the applicant's flagrant breach of planning law and non-compliance with a court order, the residents of Westmill find it unacceptable that you would grant planning permission. These circumstances give sufficient weight to the interests of the person who do not share the relevant protected status and whether this is a fair and proper exercise of the public sector equality duty. This inequality has been exacerbated by the council's delays in the planning process, persistent stonewalling of the parish council and the community, to the extent that emails were not acknowledged, let alone addressed, and residents were not made aware of a second or third round consultation. Temporary permission. If the council still decide to grant permission, it should be temporary until the council provides sufficient alternative pitches to meet the need. Conditions to include the applicant to reinstate the land to its agricultural grassland. The applicant does not control the site. Those controlling the site have a history of non-intentional compliance with the law, including planning, and it is reasonable to infer non-compliance.
Are you able to finish?
I'm finished.
Thank
That's
you.
it. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Downs. That's very helpful. And now can I invite Councillor Jeff Jones? Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. Thank you for allowing me to speak at such short notice. But I was keen to speak as I have been involved in this application for the past couple of years as the county councillor. It does sit in my division. My reason for speaking is I do believe that this site should be refused, as the site is in an unsustainable location. That's my main reason, and that is what I wanted to speak about. Having read the officer's report, they're of the opinion, they've argued that it is a sustainable location, and I would argue against that. I do appreciate that the council is short of its required 5-year supply of pitches for gypsies and travellers, which has recently been amended, but these should be in sustainable locations, and the council should perhaps look at extending existing sustainable and approved sites before considering new unsuitable sites, which I believe this one is. Also, I did hear that this application is being looked at as retrospective application, so I'm glad to hear that, as it has been occupied for well over 2 years now. The site sits outside the village boundary. I think that's an important point, along a country lane with no footway at all to walk on. I think it's something like 130 metres, it was said, outside the village boundary, but it could be 1,030 metres outside the village boundary. It's still outside the village boundary. And I'm sure members of this committee would have seen during their site visit that this site is not a sustainable location. Residents of Westmill who object to this application are not NIMBYs, but they know that having lived in the village, that a Gypsy and Traveller site on a country lane is not appropriate in this unsustainable location. Officers quote the Hearts Link service operating to Westmill that makes it sustainable. I think that was one of their main reasons. But this is an on-demand service. It does not run to a timetable, and it was funded 2 years ago by a grant from the Department for Transport to the County Council to operate it. The funding is time limited, and once that funding ceases, there is no guarantee at all that the service will continue. I do hope it will continue, because I do welcome the service in, especially in rural locations. Officers quote facilities in the village, a tea room. Well, the tea room is only open 4 days a week. There's a pub, there's a nursery and a church. That's it.
Need to stop now, please.
Thank you very much. I just ask you to refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Before we go on, can I just ask officers to confirm that there's an on-demand bus service and what that means, and then where the nearest, so that is the nearest bus stop for a regular bus, is that the one on the main road on the A10?
Thank you, Chair. Could we go back to the slide and go to number 13? And this is about the Hearts Link, which was first launched in North East Herts in September 21. The service provides transport to residents in designated operating zone, as well as providing transport links to fixed destinations in key hub towns, such as Stevenage, Letchworth, Itching, Baldock, Royston and Bishop Stortford. And due to popular demand, it's been extended to the East and North service, now expanded to include Hertford and Ware. Could we have the next slide, please? This shows the days of the week that it operates and the hours that it operates. It's also got a weekend service and an evening service to allow people to travel in the evening to other places. In order to book this, they have to download an app on the phone, and then they go to that and book their journeys. The next slide, please. And this shows that they're following the villages that are serviced by this, which includes Westmill. We have the next slide, please. And it also shows the towns to which they can travel to from these locations for other services. And if we go to the last slide, please. And this shows if you look at Westmill, the 4 actual stops that they can go to once they've booked their journey. Station Hill, Cherry Green Barns, Hamills Lane opposite Hamills Park, and the post office. So just to show how, well, this is what the actual site says opposite the post office. And you can go into the interactive map and it'll show you where that bus stop is, and may not be a post office now, but it shows, the interactive map actually shows where the stop is located.
Thank you. And can I just ask another question, which is that if residents were not to use the bus, if they were to use their car, then Westmill itself has very limited services. And so residents would go to Buntingford, which is 1.5 miles away, and that's got all the services. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, that's correct. It lies to the north, as you say, 1.5 miles.
Committee members, I know it's quite hard to separate out all the issues because they all interact, but I wonder if first of all we could think about the key principles here, the need for Gypsy and Traveller accommodation, the exception to rural area policy outside the Greenbelt, and the sustainable location, the access to essential shops and services. So Councillor Copley.
Yes, it's helpful that you started off at a point, because I did actually have a fundamental question. We've obviously just been talking about with Councillor Jones the idea of a sustainable location. Is it okay if officers could just remind us of what that definition would be? Because we seem to be talking a lot about the bus route, but is there anything else that will come into making this a sustainable site? Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Coppett, I can start to answer that question. First port of call is to look at the hierarchy of villages, and this is a Group 2 village, and so that's sort of the middle range of categories. And so, whilst it has some limited services, it does have services that are available, and so therefore we can conclude that there is, a degree of accessibility to those limited services that are accessible to residents. Also, we have to have regard for the proximity to those services, and as you've heard from the officer in the presentation, it's 100, 200 metres away from the village itself, and so proximity wise the site is considered sustainable in that regard. In also coming into a conclusion on whether the location of development is sustainable, we've had regard for the appeal case law, which is set out in the officer report, and in those appeal decisions, we've seen locations that are further away from villages that are considered sustainable in those terms. So sustainable can be accessible, it can be close to services, it can be easy to access those locations. And so I think the important thing to conclude from the appeal cases particular is that inspectors would consider, in our view, this to be a sustainable site for development. So if we were to go a different route, I think there is quite considerable risk. Could this be determined as a unsustainable location because of the precedent set from the appeal decisions? And so we've set out some of those, what we consider relevant within the report, in coming to view on this site being sustainable or reasonably sustainable.
I think I would add to that the simple observation that, in a sense, this is as sustainable as the whole of Westmill, because Westmill doesn't have services, and so most residents in Westmill rely on Buntingford, and in a way the distance is a bit similar to the outside of Hertford to the middle of Hertford. Councillor Stowe?
There's one point I want to clarify before we go into any more discussion. The clerk from Westmill made a point in her second part about the council stonewalling her inquiries, not answering emails. I would like clarification on this, please.
Thank you, Chair. I can answer that in the first instance, and it may be the officers do want to respond, but we have been in contact with the chair of the two chairmen of the parish council from September 2021 onwards. That was on a regular basis to begin with when the development occurred, and it has been less frequent as time has gone on. But I've met both chairmen and spoken to them on the phone on a number of occasions. There have been emails that have come to us. They haven't necessarily always been responded to, but the points may have been picked up in meetings. So I would say we obviously wouldn't look to stonewall anybody. We look to make sure that we do engage where we can and provide the information at appropriate times. We've not always had information to provide, so there has been periods of time where we haven't been able to provide any updates. And I know that the case officers have provided updates where they can as well.
Thank you. Councillor Buckmaster.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to raise a point under the sustainability that Neil mentioned. And under 8.14, you talk about what is local to them, in as much as the tea shop and the nursery and the public house and the church. But it doesn't mention a school, and obviously it just says there is a school bus service for children. I'm assuming those school places are in Buntingford, which is 1.5 miles away. I mean, to me, that doesn't really look at, to me, that doesn't, that isn't a sustainable site if you're actually having to bus children to another village. But actually, are there places, because most schools are actually quite full, are there school places for these children in this school?
I'm afraid I can't answer that because I haven't had a look at the school places. So.
I think we can probably have regard for the scale of development. It's 2 pitches, so there will be likelihood as there will be children that will be living within the development, and I think due to the relatively low number of children that are present, either they're living in the current site, I think that is something that is reasonably close to Buntingford, which, as we've sort of heard, is 1.5 miles away as one location, and therefore, due to the scale of development, we don't feel that additional burden on the education services would be a significant burden to warrant certainly warrant any form of mitigation.
I just wanted to return to Councillor Stowe's comment and then what we heard from Sarah Saunders. The key thing is that the representations from the parish council are very clear and very, very well set out, and so there should be no doubt that those have been properly considered and properly understood.
I didn't say they weren't. I said the clerk actually said the council has stonewalled them, which I believe is not true.
Councillor Marlowe?
Yeah, can I refer to another site where there was a similar situation? Is that allowable in this conversation?
If it's backing up a point about this application, if there's a planning principle that you want to, if you could say what you think about this site first and then back it up.
I mean, I think we're in a place where we need to allow this kind of development in the right sort of places. And this discussion about sustainability, arguably there was a case not that long ago in 2020 around us in a not too distant part down at Wheelwright's Farm in Rowney Lane at Dane End, of a similar sized site with similar number of units on it. And that was refused by this council, and it went to appeal, and the appeal was given. And I think that where we are here, I can't see why we would refuse this, because I don't think that there is a good case for refusal, to be honest.
Councillor Ball?
Considering that in 2007 character assessment described Western as one of the most distinctive features of the area and nationally noted. Now, how the distinctive features of Western will be, especially in the light of historical planning on this site, the gaps adjacent to the village separated from surrounding farms. The second part of the question, time period. The validation of the application occurred in November the 29th, 2021. How many weeks transpired before this matter reached the committee? Given that the processing of this application extended beyond 2 years, implying that recommending rejection was never considered. How did the 1.5-year delay serve the interest of both the local residents and the applicant? Thank you, Chairman.
I wonder if officers could briefly explain the sort of the storyline, because the application came in, there were stages where more information was requested, there were stages where amendments were made, And I wonder if that could just be clarified a little bit.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. I mean, with Gypsy and Traveller site applications generally, sometimes the submission when they arrive with the planning department, they can be lacking enough information for us to come to a conclusion in a timely way. And so it's incumbent on planning officers who are dealing with the application to secure all of the information that they consider is necessary to determine the application in the first instance. So what happened with this application, I believe, was that a submission was made because of the on-site activity, and that sort of ticked the minimum level for the application to be received, registered, and the clock to start. But that didn't necessarily give enough information for officers to determine whether that development was acceptable. And so over the course of time, that information was submitted by the applicant, reviewed by planning officers, consulted with the local community, and it has taken a long time. I think also because the application is part retrospective, officers have to be very careful as to what extra material that we consider is appropriate if we do go down the route of supporting a development scheme. And so we've got to try and secure that information that's reasonable and necessary and that meets the appropriate tests in order to consider that first. From my involvement with the application, getting involved sort of earlier on last year, the application became held up due to the consultee responses, in this case, the archaeological team at the counties, and a condition and a written scheme of investigation was in situation between the applicant and the agent and counties, with East Hertfordshire District Council as the planning authority chasing up both parties in order to successfully resolve that issue. As to the question whether we pursued a sort of refusal on the site, I think because of the on-site activity, we felt it was probably incumbent in order to get that information first to determine whether in principle the site could be supported, which we did, and then secondly, what extra detailed information would satisfy us to make sure that the site was going to operate successfully. And it's just taken a fair amount of time to secure that from the applicant. It's taken a lengthy time to secure consultation responses from the appropriate consultees, and that has taken us to this stage in the process. Also, legislation has changed from when the application was submitted, so the NPPF was updated in 2023, and so we now have to consider that as well.
So the process has been complicated by the fact there's unauthorized activity there, and that has involved legal steps. And so that, as you've explained, says one of the reasons why it's taken a long time. The fact that it's unauthorized doesn't affect our judgment on the application. We look at this application in terms of its own merits, as if it's a new one. Councillor Copley.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask officers again, obviously we're looking at this as a retrospective application, and I just wanted to go through what weighting we need to give that, as opposed to if we were just looking at it as a normal straightforward application. We've also know there was comments about fostering good relations between various people involved here, and any weighting or what we can do to help with that. I didn't know whether there was anything we could do if we're moving forward with this, if we voted in favour, any conditions we could put on the site which might help in terms of that regard and just generally. Thank you.
The conclusion, the report is very thorough. The conclusion of the report does talk about the weight that's given to different issues, and paragraph 10.3 does talk about limited weight being given to the intentional unauthorized development. But
Just
can you add
sure
to
what
that?
that meant. Sorry.
Yes.
Just it's worth sort of dwelling on the conclusion that stop picked up. So in terms of the weight which we've given in the conclusion, we've considered all of the district policies which are given their full weight, HOU9 and HOU10, and that talks about the suitability of the site for gypsy and traveller development. We've given regard to the national guidance in the PPTS. We've had some regard to the intentional unauthorised development on the site, the material consideration. We've also had regard to the fact that children's welfare is a consideration, and then balancing the potential harm and the benefits of the site and occupiers. We've also given due regard to the lack of a 5-year supply of pitches, the unmet need and the circumstances of the occupiers. We do consider that limited weight is given in the overall balance to the intentional unauthorised development, and that the policies, when given their full weight, have been complied with to a large extent, and that's why we have considered the application is broadly acceptable in the context of the local plan, a district plan. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Devonshire.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like some guidance on the fact that this development is outside the village boundary. I believe in GBR2 there is some recommendation that we do not like development outside the village boundaries. So can you just give me some clarification on that, please?
Yes, GBR2 does permit some gypsy and traveller site development in GBR2, and subject to the considerations of the HOU 9 and HOU 10. And so one has to have regard for what HOU 9 and 10 apply for, but also the purpose of GBR2 as well. And in this instance, the GBR2, when you apply it, you look at the development on site, and the scale of development is minimal. The buildings that are set back on the site, they are screened to a large degree within the landscape. And then I think, to pick up some of the other councillors' comments earlier on, that we've heard about, the settlement character and that sort of location outside of the settlement, and we've considered that due to the scale of development, it doesn't have an impact on that historic character of Westmill, its proximity to the development and the proximity to the village, but also the limited extent of built form within the site as being a major reason why we don't think that this development harms that character of the settlement.
So the being outside the village boundary, being within the rural area, exceptions apply to gypsy and traveller sites where they don't apply to ordinary housing. So ordinary housing is ruled out effectively, but there are, but through policy, there is that potential exception. Carter.
Thank you. Yes, so one of the comments that was raised, I think, by residents was that there could be some flash flooding. I know this is in flood zone 1, so it's not in a high risk flood area. But one thing that occurred to me is with regard to the hard standing, as to whether that's going to be SUDS compliant and whether there is going to be proper drainage.
If you look at 2.6 as part of the ongoing assessment, and when we visited the site with the agent applicants, part of the discussion, it was agreed that additional information was required in respect in respect to drainage, and that could be secured by condition.
Councillor Carter again.
Yes, sorry. So if it could be secured by condition, what can it be?
The proposed site plan shows soakaways. Are they based on a sort of surface water study? Is there some science behind those features?
It's the day rooms will be to soakaways. The small buildings that provide.
They'll be leading to the soakaways.
Yeah.
I see. But we'll hold that thought about the condition, Councillor Carter. Councillor Dunlop.
Thank you. Given that this has been in place and unapproved for 2 years, I believe, and we haven't been able to enforce during that period to reverse the position. How can we be sure that when we make a decision here tonight, that that new decision would be enforced? I'm not sure who that question's aimed at really, but you know, it doesn't give me a lot of confidence that if we approve something tonight, that that's what will actually be delivered.
It might be helpful if I, God, dramatic. Coming on that
questions.
point. So obviously when there was the intentional unauthorised development that occurred, as a matter of course, obviously the council reacted and sought an injunction, got a final injunction on the site, which retained the status quo. So everything, they weren't allowed to do any additional development. We didn't then go for a committal to remove the occupants from site, because when we do that, we have to be, as a council, have to say to the court, there's no prospect of planning permission being granted on that site. So at that time, the site has been in sort of limbo for those couple of years, because we couldn't enforce or do anything to remove from site the unauthorised development as in response to the injunction that we got, because we couldn't say as a council there are no planning reasons why this might not be granted planning permission. So that's why there hasn't been the compliance in terms of enforcement. I think obviously going forward there will be, if committee are minded to grant permission tonight, there will be a number of conditions that obviously will be attached to any permission, and obviously planning will monitor those, and if there are any breaches in respect to those conditions, then obviously the necessary enforcement action will be reviewed and taken in line with normal procedure.
And as we're not determined yet, you've described the situation should planning be allowed. If it was rejected, then would the site resort back to agricultural land?
So if planning was rejected this evening, then I'm not trying to speak for the applicant, but they may put an appeal in to the decision of the committee based on other permissions that were previously granted on appeal, and other court judgments which have rubber stamped those decisions. So it may be that the council would want to play out any appeal process which might happen in relation to any refusal this evening. Then once that's come to an end, then decide whether or not they will look to take effect of the full injunction at court.
Thank you.
The weight of if permission was granted, there would be a condition saying a maximum of 2 pitches. That's one of the conditions there, and works that take place have to be in accordance with plans. That is the basis of the control that the council would have.
It is also that a lot of the extra work that is required needs to come forward within 3 months, and so the condition sets a time frame for that being carried out. So if that time passes, then there's potential breaches of condition that may need to be investigated at that time.
Just to let everybody know that I'll open it up so it's for anything, because we've been trying to look at policy and principle, but so now open to all the considerations about local character, impacts, and so on. Councillor Watson.
Just in 8.29, it points out that we, due to how do you pronounce it? GTANA, GTANA. By 2027, we need 31, a supply of 31 pitches. What's our progress like towards that figure?
If you'd like me to take that on, actually, because the Annex 1 definition has changed as well, we also need to take into account the non-nomadic requirement as well at this point. So if you add them together, we've got the 31 plus the 5 that are needed in the first 5 years for the non-nomadic side of things as well. So that's actually 36 pitches required within the first 5 years, of which is up to 2027. Obviously, we're 2 years in already for that. Of those, we have so far granted permission for 5 pitches at the stables. It's actually 7, but it's a net 5 because of 2 that were already there in situ, granted under another permission. So we still have a significant way to go in terms of meeting the need. Also to bear in mind, of course, that the applicants were interviewed as part of our Gitana. So their needs are part of that overall total that needs to be met. And if permission isn't granted on this site, then the council will need to identify somewhere else within the district for their needs to be met.
Thank you. And just to clarify, Gitana is the Gypsy and Traveller
Accommodation
needs assessment.
yes.
So just for the avoidance of doubt. Councillor Bull. It sounded like, well, we heard that land was for sale. It was difficult to identify precisely where, so I don't know. Well, that chimes with the question that Councillor Dunlop asked. There would be a condition limiting the number of pitches to 2, because that's the need that has been identified, and how this site could serve that. So it's through conditions. Councillor Stowe.
I think you forgot me last time, didn't you? You completely forgot me, yes. What it was when we saw the drawings of the day rooms, what concerned me is a window in the back of the day room that looks across the neighbour's boundary. And I think that should be removed, or it should be a fixed window, frosted glass.
They do provide like the shower and the toilet, and they could be conditioned to be obscure glazed. But they were in the front and the rear elevations. So
get the drawing up there now, and you'll see what I mean. It's actually in the day room, not in the shower room. There we are. One at the front, one at the back.
yes, so the front of it and the rear. So the rear would face south to the agricultural buildings.
We see the site plan, please.
You please, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
so that's
sorry, I beg your pardon, Chair. Yes, sorry, you are correct. It is sort of, I thought it was the front and the rear. To the rear, though, you've got that huge, that's an outbuilding, not the residential dwelling. The residential dwelling is the L-shaped building. So you've got 2 big outbuildings along that boundary.
But that's not good enough, is it? Because if they took that down, they'd have a window very close to the boundary. And I think that's
yes, it looks, yeah. It looks onto the fence, and the fence is about 1.8 meters. So which is a standard fence. So you'd only see the very top of the window over the fence. But it could be conditioned to be obscure glazed on the top.
Well, I think
it's
it
still
needs
allowing daylight into the
non-opening
day
as
room.
well.
Sorry?
Non-opening.
Non-opening.
Yeah, it had to be. Because if they open the window, regardless of the building
But
next
it'd be
door,
non-opening below sort of 1.7.
7.
Yeah. Or 8, depending. Yeah. So that's just the top.
so non-opening,
But you'd
obscure glazed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
You'd have to be a very tall person to look out of it, though.
No, it's not looking out of it, it's noise.
Okay.
When the window's open,
Okay.
it's intrusive.
Councillor Hill.
Hi, this is just a clarification. This is a residential development, yes? Is there any condition that it will be used for commercial purposes in future?
The conditions all relate to the proposed use, and so if permission was granted, that would become the authorised use. So the conditions relate to that, and in a way that builds in the protection against it changing to something else, because that would need planning permission. Go on.
This is just for understanding, because we don't have the 5-year plan, what weighting should we give to that?
Because we don't have a 5-year plan.
We implement a 5-year plan, what weighting should we give to that when we make our decision?
Could you talk about the weight of the local plan?
Yes, certainly. So as the report concludes, we're giving that quite significant weight. So it is quite an important factor in how we are viewing these proposals, but we have also considered the policies in the round as well. And so we have to sort of look at both sides. And generally, we think the scheme is wholly compliant, and therefore the extra significant weight we put in favour of supporting the proposal just adds further weight. So it gives another reason to support the scheme.
In an appeals process, that would be considered quite heavily. Thank you.
Yes.
Councillor Stowe.
I'm sorry, I'm rather hogging it, but I'm
Not at all.
sorry. On page 67, on item 8.59, it talks about a condition that was going to be asked for or considered to restrict outdoor amplification of music and sound, or voice, I think it says. Why wasn't that condition thought about? And if it can be included, I'd be very grateful. Page 67, 8.59. If you look at the end of it,
It was talking about technologies.
a condition is recommended to restrict the outdoor playing of amplified music and voice.
Yes. 8.69. No. Oh, sorry. I've got 8.69. I beg your pardon. I'm not so sure that would be applicable. I'm not so sure the condition. How could it be monitored if you've got sort of children playing or music playing? Surely in normal residential properties, people would have normal residential noise.
I only raised it because it was there.
There's in the report, there's reference to noise, there's reference to light, and there's reference to dogs. Would it be possible to have a condition that addressed some of these points to make precautions and to enable control if it was needed? I know that a lot of these things are actually not planning, they're more to do with environmental health and that sort of thing. But is that something that could be considered?
I think for a residential form of development, that wouldn't be considered acceptable. I think the reference to outdoor music, you would normally expect to have something where it was a commercial use, noise generating use, and given again, go back to the scale of development, the 2 pitches and the number of residents on the development, that is unlikely to be different to operating you would see from 2 residential dwellings, and so I don't think it would be appropriate to secure a condition restricting amplified music or voice.
Thank you. The report is very thorough indeed, and assesses the policy implications very, very carefully. It does look at the long-term needs assessment and the justification of this site in terms of partly meeting that need, and squaring with policy HOU 9, which is the key policy with the criteria for this kind of thing. So that's one principle the report goes into in a lot of detail, and we understand the weight given to that. Then the other big consideration is the impact this has on the character of the area, which is another criterion in this policy. And we know that West Mill is very special. It's a jewel in East Herts, the village and its landscape setting. And we have heard how this it's just outside the village, and actually it is hard to relate to the village itself. There is separation, and this site is in an area where there are farm buildings. It's a little bit scruffier. It's much more rural. It's rural industrial almost. The key character consideration is the line of trees along the road. So, and I think the report says that in terms of that position, it's not likely that this would affect the character of West Mill. But having looked at the site plan in particular and the representations that we have received and we have heard, it doesn't feel to me that the architect and the applicant have really looked a lot at West Mill and its surroundings, because the site plan really feels to me to be inadequate, and it misses things that were shown in the original application. The original application had a landscape plan, and that landscape element has kind of is now lost from the site plan, and it's just subject to a condition. The site plan shows 2 pitches accommodated in a large site, and does leave open the question of what happens in the rest of the site, because it doesn't say there are areas for play. It's just grass, and then there's another color grass, and it's imprecise. And it worries me that there's no position for bins. It seems to be very important in residential property. We don't have car parking places shown, which were shown in the original application. We have the mobile home, but the application allows for 2 touring caravans per pitch, and that's not, we see 1 position for a touring caravan, and we've just heard that one of the day rooms is positioned sort of rather casually near a boundary. And it makes me feel that if we're minded to approve this, we should bolster the condition very significantly to effectively review that site plan, and certainly make all of the landscape covering hard and soft. At the moment, the condition is for soft landscaping, but there's a very large paved area. And there's a gate that's floating in space with gaps next to it. And I'm worried about, and it needs to show the landscape very precisely, because the front hedge and the trees, which are significant to the character of the area, there's damage already there. And the fence that we saw, the polythene fence, is not something that we'd want to see. So it feels to me as if the condition should cover all of those site planning aspects. It should show fencing. It should show some division between the pitches, because I don't think the applicant has done that. The officers have given an extremely thorough assessment of this in principle. But so I wonder if there's any comment in response to that.
Particularly on the landscape condition 14 requires a full soft landscaping plan showing the details of soft landscaping as stated in the letter dated on 29th of June 2023, and that is something that will be submitted to us for approval. And what that condition doesn't specify is the location of bin stores, treatment of fencing, ground surface materials, and sort of that extra layer of detail that I believe is being sought. So it is possible that we could review the wording of that condition to flesh it out and require further details that we would then have to consider when they were submitted to see whether that met the standards that we're looking to secure on the site. In terms of the layout of the site itself, broadly speaking, for this type of use, it is very informal, and so we wouldn't expect to see the same degree of formality and rigor and attention that you would for a standard residential development. And so we've considered the proposals that are on the table in terms of the landscaping, in terms of the ground treatment, in terms of the areas where there's gravel area for vehicles to move, and consider that to be acceptable in this instance, and noting that it is what it is appropriate for the use that is applied for, and so we wouldn't probably consider there to be justification for further details at this stage. But I think with a review of that wording of that policy 14, I think we can get a bit more detail, and then make sure that when the information is submitted as part of a condition, that we can secure compliance with the policies DES 3 and DES 4 in the district plan, that are landscaping and then quality of development.
I think that would be very helpful. I think there are quite a few things that need to be stated explicitly, some of which you've run through, like bins and fences and gates. And I think pitches for 2 touring caravans need to be explicit. One additional thing that I wonder whether we can think about is, in a hard and soft landscaping condition, is some sort of knee rail that stops vehicles going onto the open areas, because I think this addresses the concern that we've heard tonight about how do we back up the condition saying 2 pitches only, and how do we make it clear that those grass areas are for garden space.
That's possibly a level of detail that we can't stipulate under any particular policy that we have at the moment. I think we couldn't even set out that as an informative either, because it's not backed up by policy or guidance, unfortunately.
Any thoughts from members about the site itself, its landscape setting, the front edge of the landscape design? So if we could ask then that the landscape condition is beefed up considerably and makes as many things as possible explicit, and those things that are missing from what we would normally expect on a site plan for residential development, albeit Gypsy and Traveller. That's condition 14, and it doesn't make much difference to anything, but I wonder if conditions 13 and 14 could become conditions 2 and 3, because one of them is about limiting the number of pitches to 2, and 14 is this very important details to follow, which I would have hoped would have been part of the application. There's been long enough to do it, but we want to get to a point where we have a very clear sense of what's going to be done on that site if it's permanent. So members, are we ready to go to a decision on this? Councillor Carter?
Yes, I was just wondering about that condition on the SUDS compliance or drainage. I think is mentioned as well in is it 8 point something, 8.69?
Yes, is there a condition on drainage and SUDS at the moment?
The condition 7, condition 7 requires within 3 months decision notice, development committed, vehicular access shall be completed and thereafter retained in accordance with detailed specifications. Prior to the use, appropriate arrangements shall be made for surface water to be intercepted and disposed of separately, so that it does not discharge from or onto the highway and carriageway. So it's been linked into a sort of highways-based condition. But I think if you look at the reason for the condition, it states to ensure satisfactory access to the site and avoid carriage of extraneous material or surface water from or onto the highway in accordance with the policy in the district plan. There is a condition that addresses this runoff.
So members? Councillor Stowe?
I just wanted to make a point. I think the access road is gravel, and I think you state in the papers that this will be permeable. You'd be satisfied if it's permeable enough to get rid of rainwater. I can't remember where now, but it's in the report.
What's there at the moment is gravel. It seems
In the report, it says something about the driveway being in will be gravel, which will satisfy the requirements of permeability.
so. Does that make sense? Because the drawing shows a sort of gravel topped tarmac. I can't remember the actual term, but what we see in grey there is gravel
The crossover though.
laid into a hard. It's a hard surface.
Yeah, gravel leading to a hard surface at the rear of the site.
So the existing surfaces would all come up. That would be put down in its place.
Yes, it would.
The crossover is hard, but I think the driveway is spoken about as being gravel, isn't it?
The driveway is gravel, yes, the access to the, yeah. to the
On the road, it's bound to be hard with the crossover because highways will insist on that.
They will indeed.
There's some ambiguity there. So is that loose gravel or is it bound gravel? And is what?
It's basically cracked rock. It's not smooth, it's not.
No, I know but it's information. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Diane. So members, the recommendation is that planning permission is granted, subject to the conditions. And then in addition, subject to moving to the conditions from bottom to top and completely revising what is now condition 14 and making it into a comprehensive hard and soft landscaping scheme with all the missing details. On that basis, could I have a proposer? Councillor Watson? And is there somebody who can second it? Councillor Hill. Thank you. Can I see all those in favour of the recommendation? And can I see those against the recommendation? And those abstaining, please. So that is carried and permission is granted for this planning application. Now we go on to item number 6. And these are matters for noting. First of all, we have the appeals that have been determined. And then we have a list of planning appeals that have been submitted. And we have a list of inquiry and hearing dates. And finally, we have the planning control performance statistics, which show that the authority is keeping well above its targets in both minor and major applications. Are there any comments or points about those? Thank you. So those are noted. And finally, item 7 is urgent business. Councillor Devonshire.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to bring up the yarn bomb above the fishmongers in Hertford, which a lot of you have probably seen in the news. I just want to say that I know the owner of this fishmongers, and I believe that this was, honestly, it was more about the charitable donation that he made to acquire this yarn creation or yarn artwork. It was also to provide a bit of colour and interest in the centre of Hertford town, and it was also obviously to promote his business. But the media coverage, unfortunately, has kind of painted this council as being a bit overzealous and making us look a little bit petty. So I just wanted to bring this to the attention of the planning officers and see if we can maybe approach Mr. Glenn Graney, who is the applicant, sorry, who is the owner of the fishmongers, with a pragmatic approach so that we can try and resolve this enforcement issue. Thank you.
Is there an officer who is prepared to say something? Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I understand the concerns that have been raised and the press interest in this that occurred last week. Just to provide some assurance, we've been following normal procedure in relation to this. So we've had to respond to an enforcement complaint that was registered. We've gone out, we've spoken to the owner. We've advised him that he's in a conservation area, so he needs to take the display down or apply for consent. We haven't given a view on that. We've just explained what he needs to do at this point in time. And we've also given some flexibility on timescales because we understand that link with the charity. So I don't think it's fair to say we've been overzealous. We've been following normal procedure, responding to the complaint that's raised. And obviously, if he is to follow through and to submit an application to get consent, we will consider that in the normal way and in the round and take on board, you know, a number of considerations in relation to that. So no decision has been made at this point in time, but we have been following normal procedures.
Thank you. I didn't actually say you was overzealous. I said the press hates you as being overzealous. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah and members. That's the end of the meeting. We finish at 8:44. Thank you.